Welcome to this edition of the Million Dollar Mastermind podcast. This is where we pick the brains of high achievers from all walks of life and get their hard-earned, real-world insights on winning. I'm your host, Larry Weidel. Good afternoon, everybody. What a fun time we're getting ready to have with one of the most dynamic people in the real estate industry, bringing a lot of energy to the industry and putting a lot of information out that's helping a lot of people, and he's done it for a long time. Help me welcome Gary Wilson. Hello, Gary.
Hi, Larry. How are you?
Excellent. Appreciate you taking the time, and congratulations on your success in real estate. It's a tough thing. I'm in Palm Beach and Aspen. I split my time, and there's, I think, 3 realtors for every other one employee doing anything, every standard labor in town. And so it's a competitive business. And to rise up inside of that, you got the same 24 hours a day everybody else has had. And you somehow have been able to not just do well, but super elevate yourself, and for a long period of time. And so I want to get into that. How did you it's always fun to talk about beginnings, where these things start, because things get in your head about life and about the future and yourself and early on, and somehow those get discarded, and sometimes they pretty much keep you on track throughout your life. And so where did you start thinking about your future and about what other people were doing in life and what you might want to be doing?
Sure. Well, I knew from the time I was probably 8 years old, I was going to be involved in real estate somewhere. I thought I was going to be an architect. I was actually designing house plans. I mean, full scale. My grandfather taught me how to do it. He was a professor and one of the things he taught was architecture. My mother got me the board with the T-square and all the implements. And I was literally doing house plans that you and I would see today, doing them starting at 8 years old. Then, fast forward, where I went to high school was the middle of the country. It was farmland, hardly anybody, even going to college was a real rarity. Half of them didn't even finish high school. So my high school counselor, he said, "You're going to go to college?" I said, "You better believe I am." And he said, "Great, you're going to go to apply to Virginia Tech because they had a great architecture school." What we should have done was apply to general studies, because what I found out later on was Virginia Tech called me down for an interview and said, "Look, we just want to be respectful. Your SAT scores are not where they need to be in a school of architecture. You have to be at a level 1,200 at the time was like the top. Right. Probably around 1,000. And he said, "Why didn't you apply for general studies?" I said, "I didn't know." My counselor apparently didn't know. And so I shifted gears, went to Old Dominion and studied computer science for 4 years. But here's the fortuitous seed that was planted. My freshman year in orientation, I met my what's soon to be freshman year roommate named Socrates. His dad and mom were both Greek. His father was a Greek immigrant. And when we graduated 4 years later, of course, we were just like, we're glad to have a job. We were making money. We were going to go rent a house on the beach. His dad said, "No, you're not. Don't be an idiot. You're going to buy a house and you're going to make money from it." Yeah. And I said, "Where do I sign?" So he showed us, this was January 1986. He showed us how to structure this deal creatively. So we got our first house, a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom ranch in Virginia Beach, Virginia. We rented out the other 2 bedrooms, and now that they used to call this house hacking. Right. But those 2 guys' rent pretty much paid Sox and my monthly outlay. And that was the beginning. That was how it all started. And that's how I really got in real estate, was that architecture was the interest in housing, but the investing is where I really was meant to be, thanks to Sock's dad. Yeah.
And so he was in the right place at the right time, but you guys were receptive.
Oh, yeah.
And so you had a taste of success. It's one of the things about getting new people into business is the faster you can race them to where they're tasting money from a sale they made. And it's kind of like a young kid, like when we're both probably working at 8 years old, where we got that first paycheck that we had something to do with making. It's different. It changes you and gets you thinking different. And so it's easy to get visions of sugar plums, and this is always going to work out great.
Yeah.
Just like this. And so How long was it before you got into house number 2 and 3 and 4 and things like that?
Well, yeah. Well, by the way, you mentioned making money at 8. I had a paper route at 8 years old.
Yep.
And I remember thinking, I got my own money. I mean, there's one thing to get a quarter for. That's right. Back then, allowance was a quarter, man. That's what we got for allowance, was a quarter. So in any case, I really learned how to appreciate and value the dollar because I had to work for it,
Yeah.
But in any case, fast forward, after Sock and I bought that house 2 years later, I got married and Sock bought me out. And I basically more than doubled my money in that 2-year period. So my wife, Susan, and I bought our next house in Virginia Beach. And then 3 years later, we moved to Pittsburgh. And let me tell you, there ain't no ocean in Pittsburgh. It's cold and gray and wonderful people, wonderful sports, great food. But Gary needs to be by the water and the sun. But in any case, so in Pittsburgh, we're having children, building a family. And 5 years later, we bought the next house, which was our permanent home at the time. And that's when I realized I need to do what Sock's dad taught me. So 10 years had gone by. I was 35 years old, and I was thinking back to the point in time when we closed on that first house. We went down to celebrate at one of his beach houses in Nags Head, North Carolina. We're on the deck, and Sock's dad's pounding his chest, saying, if you boys do what I tell you to do, you won't have to work for anybody else when you're 35 years old. And I was 35, and I was working for the man, and I hated every minute of it. So I started investing, and I bought 10 properties that year of my 35th birthday. It was a total of 30 units, duplexes, fourplexes, triplexes, you name it. And at the end of the year, I'm thinking, you know what? I'm making enough money on my rentals that I could leave my day job. But I didn't do that because I was too chicken.
Right.
Kids were 401k and medical, dental, and vacation, all the trappings of the quote unquote job. Well, that lasted 5 years, and I was 40 years old. At that point, I had probably 48, maybe 52 units. Then I did leave. I resigned. Actually, August 13th, 2003 was my last day in the corporate world. And I tell you, one of the greatest days of my life, I had literally bought my own freedom. And from that point on, we started getting bigger and bigger properties. But in the meantime, what I want people to remember is I wasn't born with a pile of money. I had to work for that first down payment. And my grandmom gave me what's called an E-bond for part of it too. She saved for all the grandkids.
Right.
That's how I got that first one. But everyone else, all the other properties, I use home equity line of credit, personal line of credit, and I would never take one dime out, Larry. I would constantly take all my earnings from all my rents, roll them back in, and pay off that secondary debt. So by the end of the second year, I was down to first mortgages, no secondary debt. So now I had more equity and more cash flow. And that was really the beginning of the journey that I knew I was going to be financially free. And that's exactly what I did. I mean, there's a lot more detail, but in those years, that critical 35th year of my life, when I just put my nose to the grindstone, bought those duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes, and never came up for air, I just kept pushing, working like a dog, and became the master of delayed gratification. And boy, did it pay off.
It's always a breakthrough when you can start approaching the work you've got to do like it's a game. It's great to be in business for yourself where you can put in that extra effort, you can make changes, you can adjust your system, your cycle, your rhythm. You can call shots and not be held back by a corporation and all the rules and regulations they have in. And they have all those rules and regulations because things have gone wrong in the past. And so they've got their reason for it, but that doesn't mean that you have to get caught up in it. It's great to be able to do this like a game and see how, get a hunch, follow through on it, and then all of a sudden you find out this works for me. I'm going to keep doing this. I don't care what other people say. And how did you go from 0 to 10 in a year? Because you have to finance these things. You have to, there's paperwork involved. My hand started to fatigue just thinking about signing all of the signatures you'd have to do to buy 10 houses in a year when you said that. So how did you drive? You have to drive yourself through it, but how did you get the financing and all that?
So what I did is I was pretty good in the stock market when I was one of my first real professional job. Out of college, I worked for NASA, worked on the space shuttle program. and I worked as a contractor for the U.S. Navy, tracking Soviet subs of all things. But then I got into banking, got into regular commercial banking, worked up the ranks, saved up enough money. I would go to the company library every day at lunch. Instead of going out, I would go to the company library up on the top floor, take my brown bag lunch, and study everything I could study, right? And really was making 20% a year in the stock market. But I used that money. So fast forward, I'm in Pittsburgh, had about $50,000 in available cash I could use, not my 401k. That was all locked away. So I used that. I also got a home equity line of credit, right? And I got what's called a personal line of credit. Now, this was all in succession, not all at the same time. But what I first did is I used my home equity line of credit to make the down payment on the first 2 properties, okay, and finance the other 80%. Then I used a personal line of credit, which means it's basically not secured by real estate, to make the down payments on the next 2 properties, right? Then I decided to tap into my cash and use my cash to buy probably, I'd say maybe 4 more properties. So now I'm up to 6 properties. But what was cool about this point, Larry, is the cash flow coming out, I kept saving. So I was building up reserves. I was building up capital in a separate account. Then I started using that to acquire the new properties. The other 4 properties in the remainder of that year were bought by using cash from the returns on the first 6 properties. And each time I added a property, I had more equity and I had more cash flow. So it actually became easier. I was able to shorten the window, the time frame it took to go identify, analyze, negotiate, and close on the next deal. I was able to shorten that window, not just because it became smarter with each new transaction, but because the machine was producing revenue at a faster and faster rate with each property I bought.
Thanks for listening to the Million Dollar Mastermind. If you felt there were any valuable takeaways from this episode, please take a minute and leave us a 5-star review. Your feedback is important and really helps us get the word out to a wider audience. Remember, we have a valuable webinar that is absolutely free. Register for it right now at weidelonwinning.com. Thanks for listening.